Chad Scott for Rovology.com from beautiful St. Augustine, Florida. Now, you know St. Augustine for history, right? Spanish colonial history. Let me get sidetracked for just a minute here. That Spanish colonial history is premised on a lie. You hear that St. Augustine is the oldest city in America, the United States' oldest city. It is not. It is the oldest continually inhabited European-founded city. Out in New Mexico, there are older cities in what is now America. But as far as European-founded cities, yeah, St. Augustine is the oldest. And that Spanish colonial history is what the city most likes to promote. But in my opinion, there is a more important history to be told in St. Augustine, and it is a civil rights history. Most people don't associate Florida, let alone St. Augustine, with civil rights history, but what happened here was every bit as important, every bit as vile as anything that went on in Jackson, Mississippi, or Birmingham, Alabama. 1964, St. Augustine was the center of the civil rights movement. Andrew Young was here. Andrew Young Crossing, come along with me for a minute. He was brutalized by a white mob as police watched on. If you see where that steeple is, just beneath that. He led a nonviolent group of demonstrators and was beaten unconscious and nearly killed. Martin Luther King was here in the summer of 1964 because he recognized St. Augustine, not Birmingham, not Jackson, not Atlanta, not Richmond. He recognized St. Augustine as the hot spot in the civil rights movement. King was only ever arrested 3 times. I believe it was Selma, Birmingham, and St. Augustine. Florida Tourism Department has done a remarkable job in covering all of this over. He called St. Augustine, to paraphrase, the most lawless, wide open, racist, violent place he'd ever been. He'd been to Alabama. Been in jail in Alabama. This was worse. St. Augustine was worse. So, who are these people in this monument? Well, they're not individuals specifically. They are representations of the St. Augustine foot soldiers who were here on the ground in 1964, leading the civil rights movement, putting their bodies, their lives, literally on the line. 4 individuals are represented here. That's a young woman, teenager. She represents the young black St. Augustine residents who stood up to the Klan, the cops who were in the Klan, and marched for their civil rights. This is an older woman, and she represents the elders and some of the outsiders from the movement who came here to protest and stand up for civil rights. Next to her is a younger man in his 30s. Andrew Young was in his 30s. King was in his 30s. That individual represents the leaders of the movement who organized and led the effort here in St. Augustine for civil rights. King, by the way, here's a great piece of trivia to let you know just how important St. Augustine was to the civil rights movement. Where was Martin Luther King Jr. when the Civil Rights Act was passed? St. Augustine, Florida, 1964. It's either June or July. To tie this all together, the Munson Motor Lodge is about 2 blocks that way. That is where the infamous acid pouring by the owner of the Munson Motor Lodge on African American protesters wading into the segregated pool was photographed by the media here and then published on the front page of every newspaper in America and many around the world. The singular incident, the straw that broke the camel's back, that overcame years of filibustering in the Congress against the Civil Rights Act. It wasn't Medgar Evers, it wasn't Emmett Till, it wasn't Selma, it wasn't Birmingham. It was the Munson Motor Lodge and the owner of the Munson Motor Lodge pouring acid on black and white activists in his pool that overcame the longest filibuster in American history and had the Civil Rights Act passed the very next day. If I'm not mistaken, it would be signed a couple of weeks later by Lyndon Baines Johnson. But that's how important St. Augustine was to the civil rights movement. Critically important. The singular incident which stopped the filibuster in Congress. King was here when his life's work to that point was realized with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So that's what that figure represents. And this figure, white figure, represents the Freedom Riders, the white folks, the outsiders, the quote-unquote outside agitators, if you hear that phrase used by cops today, white nationalists today, to characterize activists from outside of a local area. So St. Augustine did see a number of outside freedom riders, activists, advocates, protesters come into town and help the local citizens with their efforts to secure their civil rights, speak up about their civil rights. The Woolworths counter, the segregated Woolworths, is that yellow facade. It's not a Woolworths anymore, but if you go over there, and we're right in downtown St. Augustine, you'll see on the doors, the push bars have the Woolworths logo on it. Oh, we'll come around here for just a second. That little tree right there, not long ago, was a Confederate monument, thankfully taken down. This building back here, this pavilion, that's the old slave market. Human beings were bought and sold there. Now it's tourist knickknacks and tchotchkes, but that's the old slave market, and that is where Klan rallies were held during the civil rights era here in St. Augustine. If we look just past that way, that's the Matanzas River, the Atlantic Ocean just beyond it. So this is where the ships would come in, offload their human cargo, and that building right there, human beings were bought and sold. And the Klan rallied there. And now the St. Augustine foot soldiers watch over it. When you come to St. Augustine, this is the history you should celebrate. This is the history you should recognize. These are the heroes.